Marriage in early America was usually understood in a religious and practical sense. By the 19th century, marriage for love, or at least companionship, became more common. Still, strict gender roles were expected for married couples. A man was expected to financially provide for his family, while his wife was expected to have children and perform domestic duties. Wealthy families like the Majors family were no exception. And as it turns out, the marriage between Susan and Alexander Majors was not necessarily a happy one, and one that did not fulfill the typical view of marriage at the time. Susan Wetzel was born in Virginia to James and Elizabeth Wetzel in 1837. Her family moved to Lexington, Missouri after her birth, where her father was a saddler. She attended school until she was at least 13 years old. There is some evidence that Susan may have actually had two unhappy marriages in her lifetime. In 1852, when she was just 16 years old, Susan appears to have married the 29-year-old Ezra R. Hickman, a Jackson County, Missouri merchant and later county clerk. According to a single account in the Leavenworth Standard, the marriage only lasted a few hours. From the Leavenworth Standard. The woman apparently loved Hickman, and they courted and married in the usual way. After the marriage ceremony, the couple retired to their room. In a little while, Mrs. Hickman appeared and announced that she would never live with Hickman. Just what happened to cause her to come to this conclusion, no one knows. Hickman used to say that he never knew. There are several theories, but nothing positively known. Afterwards, she obtained a divorce and married Majors. This newspaper article is one of very few sources for this story, although Wornall Majors Museum staff has found a marriage certificate that supports this timeline. Whatever the truth, Susan's marriage to Hickman did not last long. She married Alexander Majors in 1857 when she was 20 years old. Susan married young, even for the standards of the time. In 1890, the first year the U.S. Census Bureau began compiling marriage data, the average age of a first marriage was 26 for men and 22 for women. At the time of her marriage to Alexander, Susan was 1 year younger than Alexander's oldest daughter Rebecca from his first marriage. Marrying Alexander may have been overwhelming for Susan. She had an established household to care for, and in addition to Major's adult daughter Rebecca, she had 6 children to care for, aged 17, 14, 12, 6, and 4. Still, she was praised in the history of the San Francisco Bay region as presiding over the family home with, quote, great efficiency and kindliness. A year after their marriage, the family moved to Nebraska City, Nebraska. Susan would give birth to 4 children, a stillborn infant, Catherine, Alexander Jr., and Eleanor. In 1870, after the failure of her husband's business ventures, the family moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where she was involved in civic life. Her father, James, joined them in Utah and committed suicide by swallowing strychnine in 1873. Susan was the one who found him alive in dire condition. He died shortly after. Newspapers speculated this was due to his repeated failures in mining, a business her husband Alexander was also working in at the time. The family moved again, and by the 1880s were living in San Jose, California. In the mid to late 1880s, Alexander, Susan, and their daughter Catherine traveled throughout Europe. According to Alexander's memoirs, they lived in Scotland for a year, most likely in 1884. Majors returned to the United States, leaving the family behind and ceasing to pay for their expenses. This was the point of permanent separation and conflict for Susan and Alexander. According to their daughter Catherine, quote, in justice of my mother, I am compelled to speak of the action of father in leaving us alone as he has done. I cannot justify his action and the treatment he has accorded mother. He is fond of excitement and travel and not in sympathy with the quiet life we are leading here. When he was prosperous, he provided liberally and furnished mother with plenty of money, But when misfortunes came, he was not willing to divide fairly with her. He became selfish and petulant and complained often about having to provide for us, declaring he was too old for such duties. Mother is a proud woman, and such unfairness was humiliating to her, and one morning she told him that such talk was wrong and tiresome, and if his family was such a burden, he had better leave, and we would provide for ourselves. He took her at her word. One morning, in August 1890, he coolly informed us that he was going away to remain. This was a direct attack on what would have been perceived as Alexander's masculine duties as a husband, to provide financially, despite being 76 years old at the time. Susan and her daughter Catherine lived at a series of small boarding houses in Kansas City before a fire destroyed many of their belongings. They stayed at the Jackson County, Missouri Poor Farm during the winters of 1893 and 1894 under assumed names. They applied to live at the farm again in 1895 when newspapers caught wind of the perceived scandal, and Susan and Alexander's marriage was scrutinized on a very public level. Blame was placed on Susan by much of the press, who were quick to note her costly dress and fashionable wardrobe. The Atchison Daily Globe criticized her unreasonably extravagant lifestyle, claiming that Alexander's financial troubles had been brought on him primarily by the extravagance of a silly woman. Alexander's son from his first marriage, Green, defended his father. It is true that both father and myself are unable to do anything for them, but they are both capable of engaging in some avocation that will return them a livelihood. Father is 80 years of age and feels this sad outcome most painfully, but is absolutely without power to do anything for them, and I am also without sufficient means to better their situation. At the time, Alexander was offering his services as a mining expert, traveling extensively, and also campaigning in the West for the Silver Standard. Green was a law student. For his part, Alexander never spoke a word about the conflict, and in fact never spoke of his wife at all, except on one instance in his memoirs where he briefly mentioned her as part of an anecdote about a dog he particularly liked in Scotland. The Kansas City Journal described him as the divorced husband of Susan, but there is no evidence they were ever actually divorced. They remained separated for the last 10 years of their marriage. Alexander died in 1900 in Chicago, Illinois. He was buried in Kansas City's Union Cemetery next to his first wife, Catherine. Susan remained in Kansas City and then moved to St. Joseph, Missouri, following her daughter's commitment to an institution there. She died in 1915 in Alameda, California, near to where 4 of her children and stepchildren were living. Her gravesite is unknown. She was not buried in Union Cemetery alongside Alexander. Their estrangement extended even beyond death.